Good evening, everybody. Today is Monday, February 3rd, 2020, and this is a regular Moscow City Council meeting. Gina.
Welcome, everyone. Would you please stand with me and we'll say the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Gina. With that, we'll move on to the first item, which is the consent agenda.
I move approval of the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Art and a second by Gina to approve the consent agenda as is. I will start the roll with Sandra.
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye. Aye.
Okay. Item number 2, staff recognition report. Gary, do we have anything this night, sir, for staff?
Nothing this evening, sir.
Mayor's appointments, I do not have any this evening. More to come, however. So we'll move right on to item number 4, which is the public comment and mayor's response period, which we limit this usually to 15 minutes, ladies and gentlemen. And what we ask of you is to identify who you are and, of course, tell us what your concerns are, as long as it is something that is not in front of Planning and Zoning or the Board of Adjustments and or any public hearing that we may have. Agenda items that we have, which are action items, if we have comments about those, they will be taken as we go along through the course of the meeting during the agenda time. With that, I will recognize anybody that wants to come up, state your name, and I'll give you 3 minutes. Let us know what is on your mind.
Mr. Mayor, Nils Peterson, Director, Moscow Affordable Housing Trust, 510 West Palouse River Drive.
Hi, Nils.
I came here with an announcement and an invitation. You have heard that we have been talking about the Community Land Trust. It's a new kind of concept in our town for creating permanent affordable housing. And on March 10, we are going to hold a public event in the 1912 Center. Folks from the Northwest Community Land Trust Consortium, that's our trade group, if you will, have said that they want to come in and help us launch as a land trust and come and answer questions and be available. So at 9 o'clock, we're going to have a session for realtors and lenders. And at 4 to 5:30, we're going to have a public session. And if I can figure out Eventbrite, I'm going to send you an invitation for a lunch meeting to meet with them as well. So that's March 10 in the 1912 Center.
Thank you, Nils.
Hello there. Kelly Zachariason, Agency Administrator for PAC DMS, 521 North Main. Good evening again. I'm Kelly Zachariason. I'm the Agency Administrator at PAC DMS, which is a critical care licensed ambulance company based here in Moscow. 2 weeks ago, we received a copy of an email written by City of Moscow EMS Division Chief Debbie Karskalin, which we subsequently submitted to the mayor, City Supervisor Gary Riedner, and you, the City Council members. Before I discuss her email, however, I first want to praise the hardworking volunteer EMTs and paramedics in our city. They give countless hours in training and service for their community while trying to maintain balance between their home life, their jobs, and the demands of an increasing volume of EMS calls. Perhaps too much is asked of our volunteers from time to time. City of Moscow EMS Division Chief Karskalin oversees the volunteers in the ambulance company division of the private nonprofit Volunteer Fire Department of Moscow, Idaho, Incorporated. Her email dated December 31st, 2019 reveals that the ambulance company's shifts were, quote, empty, mostly empty, and states that they are, quote, failing as a volunteer agency. The citizens of Moscow are not aware of the danger they face. The public expects an ambulance to come when they call 911, but they might not get one, and they deserve to be made aware of that fact. As first responders, we are trained to assess the emergency medical needs of our patients, but must also be able to evaluate the effectiveness of our EMS systems. EMS Division Chief Carscallon was recently nationally recognized for her achievements as Paramedic of the Year. So I trust her when she calls into question that the EMS system in Moscow may be failing. People trust their city representatives to make the best decisions regarding public safety. By what standard do city officials measure and evaluate the effectiveness of their current EMS system? Volunteers may not be able to respond with an ambulance to a medical emergency, and if none can, who will? PACT EMS staffs 2 to 3 ALS paramedic level crews on duty in any 24/7 period. We are always in service, and we are capable of meeting the demands for emergency medical services in Moscow. We have dedicated ourselves to the saving of lives and the preservation of health. This is our community too, and we stand ready to serve. Will you? Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Gary, I got a question for you. With that was just being said, has there been an instance that we know that on an ambulance call that we were not able to participate and take care of a patient?
No, I believe there have been some situations where there may have been a delay, but we've always been able to staff according to the chief and Debbie Carscallon. That doesn't mean during sometimes vacations mainly, there may be reduced response, but the fire department's been able to cover those calls and has historically.
Thank you. Okay, others who would like to come up and speak?
Good evening. Let me start with this again.
Gary, tell us your name. I know who you are, but
Yeah, all right, I'll take Gerald Warner. I live in 1521 East B, Moscow. In my culture, we honor our forefathers first, out of respect for our elders. My great-great-grandfather was highly respected by the U.S. government and his people, being one of the greatest chiefs in this country. Hunk Papa, Lakota of the Great Sioux Nation, Chief Gall. An interesting fact, the U.S. government has a law that's in effect today since 1870. It's illegal to uprise the Sioux Indian. My father today is the oldest living descendant of Gall living in this county. My native name is Wolf that Watches Over. My English name, of course, is Gerald Warner. I've been in business in Moscow and surrounding areas and investing and contributing for 47 years. In 2007, it was my best year ever. Then starting in 2008 was my worst year ever. My business dropped 90%. And it continued for 10 years. A lot of people don't realize what was going on in this town and area, and actually the whole country. Living on 10% was tough. But it did teach me that I could survive. But we must all protect our rights as citizens of this country. In the summer of 2008, I was asked by Lake County Commissioner Jack Nelson if I'd like to run for county commissioner in his spot since he was retiring. At that time, I declined. But in January of 2009, I changed my mind. And I got into the political arena. In the last 4 years, I've been helping the current administration to drain the swamp in this country. I've always believed we need to fix government from local to Washington, D.C. I have now been forced to turn my attention to the local level, which is very important too. The supreme laws of this land are in this order. The treaties and the Constitution are the supreme laws of this land. The only job a government has is safety, health, and welfare of those you represent. powers of the cities are defined by state and federal laws and the constitutional provisions. Local ordinances and resolutions that conflict with the state or federal laws and constitutional provisions can be struck down by the courts. For example, the policy areas where cities preempted from regulating registrations and licensing of automobiles, ownership, possession, and transportation of firearms, and regulations of obscene material and conduct. We the people, along with the Bill of Rights, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, we have natural human rights too. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. One man's junk is another man's treasure. We also have the right in this country to have a business on our property as long as we follow the safety, health, and welfare of others around us and the building codes. The reason I'm here tonight is bring light to some of the ordinances and resolutions that have negatively affected our rights as citizens in this country. The supreme laws, natural human rights, state laws, and even the county building codes they're affecting. Some of the ordinance and resolutions lead to vague and questionable interpretation. The government's job of safety and health versus the laws of who owns the view are in question and interpretation.
Jerry, could you please wrap it up?
I'm going to try. I'm slow at this, but only one more page here, I'll be done. The eliminating of commercial and industrial businesses in town is where the storage comes from, especially for small business. The ordinance is not allowing someone to buy a piece of land and build a storage unit to house their boat and RV and hobbies and small businesses that are legal to have on any land. The city ordinance today only allows you to build a storage building as long as there's a house on it. The lots aren't big enough. Some of us can't afford more than one house. The ordinance that only allows 48-hour parking on streets and that have issues. There are signs for 3-hour parking downtown, but none for 48 hours anywhere in town. The parking of certain size tires, or how many tires you have on the street. It's a questionable ordinance. What are the safety and health concerns? Or is it the view? No one owns the view unless you buy it. The speed limit signs going down the state highway, they're not up to code through this town. That's the state highway. It's 35 miles an hour on the state highway, minimum.
Jerry, I'll give you 6 minutes, which is twice. I appreciate what you said to us, and I tell you what, if you'd like to send us a letter on anything else that you have remaining that you'd like to say, that would be fine, but we're gonna,
Cut it in half, Bill.
okay, well, thank you for doing that, but
Anyway, so I'll send you a copy of this. We need these concerns, and from a famous actor, I'll be back.
thank you, Jerry. Thank you. You bet. Okay, others that would like to speak? Okay, with that, I'm going to close the public comment period and move on. On our agenda, we have a Citizens Commission report on the Moscow Arts Commission that will not happen this evening. That will happen at a future date. And so we will move on to item number 6, which is approval of an agreement of FEMA Advanced Assistance Paradise Creek Flood Hazard Mitigation Study Project by Bill Belknap, and I said that all in one breath. So, hi, Bill.
Good evening. So to provide a little bit of background on this item, the city periodically experiences flooding events on Paradise Creek and Hog Creek in town. We had an event like that in the spring of 2017, and we were receiving some disaster recovery funds and working and meeting with FEMA staff. And at that time, FEMA staff encouraged us to apply for a flood hazard mitigation grant to do a study to see how we could potentially reduce the risk of property damage from these flooding events. That flooding, or that study, was intended to identify and potentially construct flood hazard mitigation actions that could reduce that risk of property damage on Paradise Creek. We did file an application then in the fall, in the fall of 2017. And we went through a kind of an extended review process where additional information was requested and was provided to FEMA. I think we had 3 supplemental submissions we provided to the application over the course of that time period. But it became somewhat clear that FEMA did not feel that we were ready to proceed with a flood hazard mitigation grant, and they encouraged us to shift our application to their advanced assistance program. This was kind of the events we were having and have experienced here on Bridge Street. So these are photographs from both 2012 and 2017 events where we had snow melt and intense precipitation events. And that is probably one of our most flood-prone areas, along with a few areas on Roosevelt and Eisenhower and a few others throughout the community. The Advanced Assistance Program is really intended to be more of a preliminary study to assess and identify potential flood hazard mitigation actions. It does not move directly into construction funding, so it is kind of that advanced work to help a community study their watershed and to identify potential mitigation actions. We were recently notified that we were awarded $295,200 in grant funding to assist in this effort. The total estimated study cost is $393,600. Of that, we have the $295,200 in grant funding, as well as $98,400 in local match. And that match includes both $10,000 in pre-application engineering that we incurred in preparing the application for the 2017 application, as well as $41,600 in city staff time in-kind labor match for project administration and oversight. And then the cash match obligation from the city would be $46,800 for the project. The area that would be studied starts here up about Darby Road. So here's Mountain View Park, kind of in the northeast corner of town. We'd be upstream from that, from the Darby Road crossing, all the way down to the Troy Highway crossing. And this is the areas along Paradise Creek that we have the most extensive flooding within the community. The study will explore potential flood hazard mitigation alternatives, determine what might be the most viable option for the city to pursue to help address and minimize these flooding issues. It is clear there is not going to be a silver bullet that will address all flooding events or all flows, but we can certainly work to lessen the impacts, especially of the smaller flooding events that the city incurs. So that area would then go from Mountain View Park to the Troy Highway. It would include field survey of current channel conditions, assessment of the hydrologic conditions within the watershed, as well as the development of the hydraulic model to understand how flooding events occur and respond in the community. A number of alternatives will then be assessed and determined to assess their effectiveness and mitigation of their property damage within the impacted area. Once a preferred alternative is then selected, the study would develop a 30% design in order to get through the review and environmental review process with FEMA, as well as complete the benefit cost analysis that looks at the potential reduction of property damage relative to the proposed construction cost or long-term maintenance costs of the selected alternative. So the study could then be utilized by the city. If we do identify viable options that we could reduce flooding risk within the community, then we could take the results of the study and pursue funding for actual construction of those measures. On January 22nd, the city received a sub-recipient agreement. So this money is coming from FEMA through the Idaho Office of Emergency Management. It is a very brief, one-page sub-grantee agreement that will allow us to access those funds to implement that study. So this evening, staff is seeking council approval to execute the sub-grantee agreement with the Idaho Office of Emergency Management. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions the council may have.
Questions for Bill?
None.
Thank you, Bill. Before council deliberates on this, is there anybody from the public that would like to comment on this? You're welcome to come up at this time. Okay, I'll turn it over to council. Gina.
This came to Public Works
Yes.
and Finance last week, and we were particularly taken aback by the fact that they judged us not ready and then pointed us towards another grant and gave us money for it. I was impressed with that. And I liked the way that they were kind of helping us. We did you said three different edits during the process. So I think they see the need in our community, in my opinion, and I like that they have done this. So I'm in favor of the approval of this acceptance.
I would just tack along to that having this degree of assessment can help us to hopefully get the grant funding for the solution that will be most effective, which is ultimately, what we're hoping for, and complicated to determine what that would be. So that's how these funds will help direct us for that. So I'm in support of it as well.
The comment from councilors. Arthur, did you have something you wanted to say?
Only that these things always seem to be molasses in the wintertime with the speed at which they go, especially for the people underwater on Bridge Street. But at least it's progress in the right direction, so I think it's a good thing.
Okay. All right.
All right, I'd move approval of the subrecipient agreement for the FEMA Advanced Assistance Paradise Creek Flood Hazard Mitigation Study Project.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Art and a second by Gina to approve the subrecipient agreement for FEMA Advanced Assistance Paradise Creek Flood Hazard Mitigation Study Project. I'll start the roll with Maureen.
Aye.
Aye.
All right,
Aye.
Aye. Okay, well, we'll move on to item number 7, which is Latah County All Hazard Mitigation Plan Project List Approval. Bill Belknap, you have that as well.
Thank you, Your Honor. So somewhat related to the last item, actually on the list of mitigation projects, Latah County is currently updating the 2011 Latah County All Hazards Mitigation Plan. And that is a document that all jurisdictions, all counties within the state of Idaho are required to have, which involves an assessment of all both natural as well as man-made hazards that may exist or be present within that area, and to identify actions to help address and mitigate those hazards. The city does not have its own independent plan. We are a component of the county's plan, and so they are requesting information from us to help and assist them in updating that document. In early January, and this update process has been somewhat ongoing over the last 3 years. I think there have been kind of multiple project managers updating the document. We've had multiple staff members here at the city that have had some interaction with it at various points in time. But just in early January, we did receive a request to identify and prepare a list of hazard mitigation actions the city felt would be helpful in reducing the risk and impact of hazards to the city of Moscow. It was then distributed to the relevant city departments, and we requested both police, fire, information services, streets and public works and utilities, requested them to compile a list of potential hazard mitigation actions for review. As I mentioned, these address both natural hazards, so the flooding events we just discussed on the prior agenda item, as well as potential human-made hazards that could be related to utility systems or emergency response radio communications or hazardous materials releases. So it does cover a wide variety of potential hazards facing the community. Inclusion of these items in the plan does not necessarily commit us to taking action, but it does help us identify actions we may wish to pursue and helps us to receive both current grant programs we participate for fire and emergency services and equipment, as well as potential future grant funding for projects that may be identified. There are a list of projects. There were 40 projects in total, and I'll kind of run through them somewhat quickly. But looking at our wastewater system, there is a action to identify and reduce sewer inflow and infiltration during flooding events. That's where we have groundwater and or potentially surface water that enters the sanitary sewer system that can potentially overwhelm the treatment plant during those high flooding events. So reduction of inflow and infiltration is an ongoing effort, and that includes lining of manholes, replacement of sewer mains, and addressing areas where you're getting that infiltration Without addressing that during those flooding events, we could have the potential release of untreated waste into Paradise Creek and the watershed, so we certainly don't want to see that happen. Installation of backup, another item was installation of backup power at key area lift stations to maintain continuity of operations during flooding events and power outages, to continue the capital replacement program and actively identify those aging wastewater collection system components and have those replaced, as well as flood-proofing the water reclamation and reuse facility that is our wastewater treatment plant from damage that may occur during high flow events. We had a number of pieces of equipment just this spring in April, the flooding event of April of 2019, I should say, where we had multiple pieces of equipment that were damaged during that high flow event from debris that came through the system and into the wastewater treatment plant. The fire department has a number of items, including continuing to fund personal protective equipment for staff, to facilitate continued funding for volunteer fire department training, equipment, and community fire prevention awareness, to update aging emergency radio communication systems for the city and rural fire districts, to establish funding for an emergency operations center for the city. That is an element we're hoping to include in the new police station, but additional equipment may be necessary to make that fully operational. The fire department would also like to pursue installation of a backup power generator at Fire Station 2 for critical operations during disaster events, as well as to identify potential sources of hazmat storage areas in the event of a release, and provide upgraded training facility for the Moscow Fire Department surrounding agencies, as well as obtain funding for in renovation of Fire Station 2 to increase the resident firefighter staffing to improve response times and capacity. And the final item was to obtain funding location for a future Station 4 as the community growth dictates that's necessary. As we look at the water department, a number of actions related to replacement of fire hydrants that may be 40 years in age or older to ensure their operations during emergencies, continued capital replacement of the aged water distribution system, maintenance on pumps, wells, and controls, as well as our high-pressure systems, and then replacement of 3 aging water booster stations, including backup power generation to ensure they can provide fire flow to the high-pressure zones, as well as continuity operations during power outages. Maintenance, again, on the storage facilities, annual updates to the system control software, as well as a program to maintain all distribution valves and replace those that may be damaged. For the police department, they identified the potential need for barriers at 6th and Main and 3rd and Main to reduce vehicular threats during downtown community events such as Farmers Market. Also to equip the police department training room with command post equipment in case of emergency, and then update aging emergency radio communication systems and improving city coverage to ensure adequate response in interagency communications. With looking at the streets and stormwater, again, to create a capital replacement program and actively identify aging failed stormwater infrastructure. That is an activity that is likely to occur with the potential formation of that stormwater utility. They also recommend to conduct a comprehensive study of Moscow's creek systems, including Paradise Creek and Hog Creek, to identify problem areas and to help address and mitigate flooding events. Again, we have that study for Paradise Creek. Hog Creek is another drainage we also need to look at in the future as well. To assess, plan for, and fund the replacement of bridge and culvert structures that are substandard, deteriorating, or an obstruction to flooding events. Acquire easements and develop access points and pathways to allow for maintenance and emergency repairs of drainage facilities. Perform a comprehensive assessment of the condition of city-owned stormwater infrastructure. Develop a response plan for wind events and the debris that's associated with those events. And continue to support the pavement management program to reduce premature roadway failure and winter and ice damage. And finally, install a backup power generator for the city shop facility, which acts as a command post for equipment and fueling and sandbag preparation during those flooding events and windstorms. Information systems also address updating the radio repeater so that it carries forward from both fire and police. Replacement of mobile and portable radios that are beyond their useful life, as well as adding a city-wide wireless network for redundancy and communications between facilities. And finally, to build fiber optic networks to utility sites to ensure redundancy of operations there as well. And administration, finally, was to identify preservation of public records by moving those records from a facility not prone to flood damage. The bulk of the city's records are stored in the basement here of City Hall, and we've had somewhat minor flooding events, but we have had some damage that has occurred in the past, To help assist that, also was identified to scan all critical public records with redundant digital storage to ensure that if some damage to the physical record occurred, we had a digital backup. Assess and install security systems at all critical government facilities. And the final action was to install a natural gas backup power generator at the Hamilton Indoor Recreation Center. That is a designated emergency shelter, and having backup power generation during those events would help the operations of that facility. So the projects were evaluated then using FEMA's Stapley scoring system. So that's an acronym for social, technical, administrative, political, legal, economic, and environmental. So in each of those categories, there are a number of questions related to community acceptance, technical feasibility, long-term solutions, secondary impacts. So we had a group of 4 individuals that reviewed those: the police chief, fire chief, city planner, and the operations director, deputy city supervisor for operations, all reviewed and scored the projects. And it's a fairly simple -1 to 1 scoring system on each of those categories. From that, you'll see that in your packet, there's a list of the projects and then the Stapley scoring that they received. And depending upon that scoring, they are then ranked in FEMA's system on a priority from high, medium to low. And then each individual project has to have this mitigation action worksheet as part of the submission process. So in your packet, you have the list of all the projects, their scoring and priorities, and then the 40 individual mitigation action worksheets that came out of that process. So the items that were high priorities, just to kind of run through those: installation of backup power generation for the lift stations, identification of high risk for the I&I, infiltration and inflow, replacing those fire hydrants, and continuing with the capital replacement on the water system, replacement of the 3 aging water booster stations and backup power generation, creating a capital replacement plan for the aged and failed stormwater infrastructure, the comprehensive study of Paradise Creek and Hog Creek, updating the aging emergency radio communication system, improved coverage, replacing the mobile and portable radios that are beyond the useful life, and the preservation of the public records to move those out of that flood-prone area, and scanning those records for long-term storage. So those were of that list, those were the projects that were scored as being the highest priority, and then the others were either medium or low priority. These actions are required by FEMA to be approved by the City Council, and that's why we're here this evening. Staff is seeking your approval of this proposed list. This document is updated supposed to be updated about every 5 years. So we had a little bit longer period on this time, but we have the opportunity to update and revise these really at any point in time. We can submit them as an appendix to the plan if the council or the city chose to update those at some point in the future.
Questions for Bill before I ask for a public comment?
I have one question. So if there was something that somehow didn't make it onto there, that an unexpected hazard that no one could predict, or can we not qualify for any FEMA funds if it's not on this list?
I don't think it's helpful. Every grant application, every grant program has kind of a scoring system, and usually having it in one plan or more than one plan, you get additional points in that process. So it wouldn't prohibit you from making that application. There are some ongoing activities with some of the protective equipment the fire department receives from some ongoing grants. If those aren't in the project or in the plan, you will not necessarily get funded. But other items that may come up, I don't think we would be excluding from making an application. We may not get as many points, or we may want to do an appendix and update our section of this document to get it in the document before we make that application.
Okay. Okay, do we have anybody from the public who would like to make a comment on this? Okay, I'll turn it over to council, but before I do that, I want to make a comment, because last year we did have a flood in 2019, and the previous one was in 1996. We had a 23-year stretch. And one thing I've lived here long enough to know is that, oh my God, I hope that we don't have another one for at least 23 years. Who knows? I mean, these things just happen, and they usually come at the most least expected time for us. It has been my experience in the 42 years that I've lived here, so I think this study is very worthwhile. And this was heard on Public Works and Finance as well, correct, on the 27th? Yep.
Yes, sir. And I think it's probably the first time that all 3 of us have been through it. And it was interesting, the variety of items from the, $20 million option all the way down to radios and personal protective equipment and things like that. So it'll be interesting when we update again to see how many of these we've done.
Is there a certain amount that we can expect to get from them to cover these? I mean, do they cover half of them? Do they
These-
cover 3/4 of them, or 100%?
Every program is different, so just getting these on the list, we would have to even identify if there are projects that align with these potential actions. And so at this point in time, we don't have specific programs identified, other than some of our ongoing law enforcement or fire department protective equipment grants that we do receive on an ongoing basis. Beyond that, there may be other programs that we have not yet identified. But at this point in time, just getting them on the list will help us to give us supporting information as we make applications and look for grant opportunities.
And Bill, as this goes along, mitigation on potential hazards or actions that would come in front of us, I mean, this is going to be kind of an ongoing thing, as I understand it.
Certainly, if we identify a grant program for one of these actions, it will come before the council for the council's review and approval.
And as we all saw, I mean, it covers a number of different departments and areas within our city, so.
Your Honor, if I may.
Gary?
I would also point out, you saw several projects up there, including the booster stations, moving city records. The plan is to move those records to the Mann Building after the police station is built and the engineers and community development is moved to the 4th Street facility. So we're proceeding on a lot of these projects. Putting them on this list merely makes them eligible or identifies them for potential grant funding should it become available.
Yeah. And that's actually, in a nutshell, Art,
Yeah, I was just going to say that trying to foresee what the hazards are and getting them on a list to start alleviating the ones that we know about and getting as much grant money as we can to take some of the burden off of the taxpayers and get some progress on these issues is really important for this town. And I'm glad to see that staff did the good work in wading through all the potential hazards that they could identify and getting them on the list so we can start getting grant money.
If I could add one more thing to that.
Sandra?
When we first heard about this before, the things that really stood out in my mind are, every time we looked through that list, we heard words like failing, aging, backup, protection, and these are all things that we don't really like to think about, but boy, when there's an emergency, when we did have a flood last year, I don't know how many people were knee-deep in that, but I was out knee-deep with a shovel and sandbags last year trying to make sure property was protected, and so to get these things on a list and be able to be a little proactive, I think is really, really important.
I agree.
Okay. How would the council like to move forward?
Well, Your Honor, I move we approve the proposed hazard mitigation action list.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Gina and a second by Sandra to approve the proposed hazard mitigation action list. I will start the roll with Sandra.
Aye.
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 Okay. So that is complete, Bill. With that, that is the end of our regular council meeting, but we do have reports, and I know there's a bunch of them, and I'll start with Randy.
Yeah, I just have one report, and that was from, was that just yesterday? No, Saturday. I think Sandra was there in the morning, and I was there in the afternoon at the second official monthly city-sponsored plastic film drop-off, and for all of those materials that are no longer accepted in single-stream recycling here and many, many other places. And when I left at 4:30, 411 citizens had come with their plastic to drop off.
And that's the first Saturday of every month?
It's the first Saturday of every month, and 10 big double bins full of plastic. So it was well beyond more than double of what it was the last time. So and many people were very thankful and wanted to pass along thanks for the city and for making this available.
Neat. Cool. Yeah.
Nothing tonight. Moscow Farmers Market Commission will be tomorrow evening and Arts Commission next Tuesday.
Okay. Maureen.
Nothing.
Arthur.
Yeah, a bunch of us were down in Boise for the Association of Idaho Cities meeting, and which we lobbied on our local representatives for issues of interest to this town, including efforts to try to increase the city's budget through various means. Didn't get a lot of approval from the legislative types, but at least we're talking about it. Also spoke to them about the need to continue funding for the university. Education in Idaho does not stop at 12th grade, and so more attention needs to be paid to the university. So we talked with our legislators about those issues, for better or for worse, but at least they know we're thinking about them in these ways. Can I put it any more gently? So-
I'll add some to that, Arthur. How's that?
Okay.
Do you want to do that now?
No, go ahead, Gina.
Okay.
Oh, no, if I start talking, I've got 4 or 5 things I want to talk about,
Well, you
so.
look like you were moved. I didn't want to get in the way.
I'm always moved, Gina.
So let's see, I missed the Clearwater RC&D meeting, and then I ended up speaking with the executive director today, this afternoon. And that is a fairly complex group and a complex topic. And the one thing I can tell you is that I am maybe toe deep into the knowledge I'm going to need to have. And it just so happens that their executive director is leaving. And so I'm going out Thursday morning bright and early to get the rest of my foot, at least, into the knowledge that I need to have. It's really an interested and very engaged group. It's just a matter of new girl on the block. I also attended the Parks and Rec Commission meeting, and the highlight, normally they're pretty exciting meetings, but this one included Palouse Prairie Schools. I want to say they were third graders, and they came to sell us on this interpretive sign that they want to place at Mountain View Park. And there were probably 20 of them, and they all had like a line in this presentation. And then, they'd get like 5 that really did a good job, and then one guy was kind of looking around, and his buddy would hit him, and he'd go, "Oh, yeah, yeah," and then he'd say his line. And one didn't have a line, and so the other kid next to him was trying to split. It was awesome. That sign is really going to be cool when it gets placed out there. Darn it, they were cute. And all of these, that was a pretty good sized sign, and all of these little pictures that the kids had drawn were all kind of in the same design. They said they did them over and over and over again to get them more similar. Can you imagine what that teacher went through? But they're all explaining physics concepts. So I'm figuring I'll spend probably half a day out there learning about physics. Anyway, it was a good meeting, and I hope they come back next time.
Sandra?
After all that, I think I'm glad that I didn't have anything to go to this week, because there's no way I could follow that up. But I was in Boise at the one commission meeting we had, so I wasn't able to go to that.
Okay, well, I've got several things. I want to talk about it. I had an AIC board meeting on January 22nd, and we covered a lot of territory on this upcoming legislative session, and there's more I'm going to speak about that we talked about on the 31st. But anyway, we covered a number of different issues, and these are ongoing issues that are very, very important, in particular to cities and counties. I'm going to address that here in a few minutes. On January 22nd, we had the Mayor's Youth Advisory Council meeting, and we had Stephanie Allen do an update on the census that's going to be taking place starting here in March, and that's a very, very important thing for our city and our county. And to be quite candid about it, 10 years ago, we really basically did a lousy job, as did Whitman County, and part of that reason had to do with university, because there were a bunch of these kids weren't getting counted that live in our community 9 months out of the year at least. And so that's a big thing for us to make sure that this is happening. And so there's a real push by our county and our city and our chamber and groups working together to get this count accurate, because that affects federal monies for schools, cities, counties, all kinds of different things, hospitals. And so that's a big thing for us to make sure that this is accurate. And so as it comes along, and for the first time ever, people are going to get an email on this, which they did not have in 2010. That'll be the main course of getting a hold of people. And then if that doesn't work, then there will be a letter written. And if that doesn't work, they'll get the good old door knock, which is what we're all probably more used to in past years. But it's making it a much, much easier process for us to do. And that's a big thing for us, for our city. And it's something that shouldn't be nonchalant. And it's really not invasive. They just want to know how many people live in your house, that type of thing. It's not one of these things that takes a whole bunch of privacy stuff about information about you personally. And that is a good thing. So with that, I wanted to pass that on. January 29th, we had an airport board meeting, which I chaired that particular day, and we talked about a number of upcoming projects for 2020 and 2021, and we talked a little bit about the terminal, possibilities about that, and that's something that's going to be coming forward because and this council will be hearing from Tony Bean, Executive Director, about $1 million grant that we've got for the design process on that. And of course, a couple of things. One of the things that we keep saying, we keep pounding the table for over here on this side of the fence is we need a Boise flight. And not only for the university, but for our town and for other things that we have going on. And personally, I'm not interested in any more flights westward to Seattle. We got plenty of those. We have 5 a day, and that's enough. We need to go east somehow, or southeast, however it may be. And so we're working on that, and everybody knows that. And so that's something that's going to be a big thing for us. It's going to be a big deal for our city as well as our university. But, and of course, what I like to always say, and I say this in these meetings all the time, is a terminal, and we all know we need a new terminal, there's no doubt about it. The catch is, how do we pay for it? And that's a question I always ask, and so we've got some work to do on that. With that being said, by the way, everybody that has ever flown out on an early morning 5 a.m. flight, isn't that a fun thing? You get up at 2:30 and you go out there, be there by 4 to load all your stuff up, and away you go. The good news is, starting here in about 3 weeks, there's going to be a 7:10 flight as well in the morning, which will be a little bit nicer, huh? So you're going to have 2 morning, we're going to have 2 overnight planes. That's going to be kind of a cool thing for us. So if you don't need that connecting thing to go all the way back east, maybe that 7:10 flight will work out better. I'm kind of looking forward to it because those 2:30 flights where you got to get up at 2:30 in the morning and be out there by 5, and man, by the time you get somewhere, you're a zombie. And so that'll be pretty nice. I'm looking forward to that.
Feel for me, Bill, I got one of those tomorrow morning.
Well, Art, and I've got one coming up before this takes place too, incidentally, so there you have it. So there you go. Now, I want to talk, on January 31st, one of the fun things I had, and I'm going to talk about this before I talk about the legislative stuff, is that I went to the Rotary. 2 weeks ago, I did a proclamation on the 100th anniversary of Rotary here in Moscow. It's 120 years old worldwide, and kind of a neat thing. I did another proclamation reading there, and Maynard Fosberg, who turned 100 years old, this proclamation, of course they had one, I didn't need to take one, but I wanted another one because Maynard is the president-elect for the 100th anniversary, and he was the president 50 years ago for Rotary here in Moscow. And so it was my pleasure to get a chance to visit with him and talk to him, and what a absolute outstanding citizen. And boy, for a 100-years-old guy, as sharp as a tack. And he was, of course, a professor here at the University of Idaho. And he told me, just lickety split about from the time he was born in 1920 and ka-chinged right away about he went to Modesto Community College, and then he ended up going, he was in the service for 5 years during World War II, and he got his undergraduate at Wisconsin, and his master's at Wisconsin, came out here and started teaching in 1949. You think about that, 71 years ago, and was able to get his doctorate degree at Wisconsin while he was working here. And he said it was great because he was able to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. He was able to get his doctorate while he was doing the work he loved, and he was getting paid for his work. And I was just very intrigued by talking to this gentleman. Anyway, it was a wonderful evening that night. It was quite a gala event. I wanted to share that with you. Now I'll go into my January 31st AIC meeting that we had. We had 2 that particular day. One was for a new executive director, which we do have. His name is J. Mark Browning. I do not know this individual, but he will be our new executive director. And so we'll be moving forward with that. And then some of the legislative stuff that we talked about, and something that impacts this city as well as any city in this state, is House Bill 353 and 355. All these councilors up here received a letter that we sent out today, as well as to our state representatives. And what this has to do, it has to do with property tax, because there's this theme, property taxes are high, and we all know that they're high. But it's more than just being high. It's something that this state wants to get things fixed. And I've said this many times, cities and counties We'll work together for a solution, but we've got to have a solution that is smart, and it's not just about cutting taxes every single time we turn around. And yes, our property taxes went up last year. That took effect October 1st because we passed a police bond that was 19% of that. And yes, we took our 3%, we had another 3.5 that we took that we needed in our budget from foregone taxes. Now, the thing I'll say about this is, that was not a surprise to anybody, this 19%. And what that did, ladies and gentlemen, is we had a 10-year bond that we approved for a police station, $10 million, and we got that rate at 1.27. And I would dare to say that we've never had a bond rating that low ever in the history of this town. And I'll go on record right now saying I doubt if we ever get one that low going in the future. That was a very good rate that we received. And from my own personal experience, the previous house I had, yeah, it cost $188 a year. My new residence that I'm at right now costs me about $9 a month more for that. And I've got, I mean, it's a infrastructure that we need in this town that we're working for. The point I'm trying to make is, and I encourage folks, this Saturday and every 2 weeks, we have coffee with our legislators at the chamber, which I plan on being there, of course, and talking to our legislators. And some of them, we've got pretty doggone good legislators, I will say, in our area. They're very easy for me to work with. I've got a little bit more work to do with one in particular, one which I plan on visiting more with. However, this notion that our state, where we cut taxes, and the next thing we look at is cities and counties, well, we must remember something. I'm going to fight like hell for whatever I've got to do for our city and for our county, because we've got a university here, and it makes a big difference for us. Now, with that being said, do we need to be practical? Absolutely. But if we cut taxes or we freeze taxes, and it comes to the point where we're limited in our budget, and these 6 people up here with me, we will be working on a budget, and we don't have a fat hog in our budget, we'll do whatever we have to do, because that is what our jobs are. But I think it's very good for the residents of this town to know exactly the direction we're headed and what we need help with, because we're all in this together. This fight is for all of us. It's not just for a simple group. And there's not just an easy cut solution to this. And so with that, I'll end my chat. Gary, do you have anything for us?
Nothing tonight, Your Honor.
Oh, by the way, I think it's February the 19th, I give a State of the City address for the Chamber of Commerce at the Best Western. I'd love for all of you to be out there, because we're going to have a fun time. We're going to talk about everything, and probably this may even come up at that time. We'll just see where we're at with things. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I would ask for adjournment. Let's go. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We're ended at 7:52. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.